and it was about images of Indian women in India's media. And that for me was like a eureka moment, because that's when I first understood the power of the camera and how the camera, images are constructed, and we are then defined by those images. And I applied that to race in England, and came back and it just occurred to me that I should do something like this to combat racism. And so I thought I'd train as a journalist, and by training as a journalist I thought I could change the world.
As we now know, journalism can't change anything.
Well, I ended up at Radio WM reading the travel and weather.
You helped people get to work on time, that was a good thing.
That was, there was always trouble on the M1 at junction 16. Northampton turn off, tailbacks in both directions.
Did you ever want to go up in a helicopter?
Oh, that was
the eye in the sky.
Posh. I never did anything like that, no. But what was good about being a journalist was that, we used to make these packages, we call them packages, where, you would have a bit of music, a bit of what we call actuality, sound of whatever your story was, an interviewer going back to actuality, using the music all the way through. So you were editing these little audio films, really. And I loved doing that. That was a great thing for me. And we used to stay in the studio, it was at Pebble Mill. We used to stay there till quite late at night doing those packages. So I got the taste, really, of storytelling there. But, there's a limit to how many stories I could tell. And that's when I then moved back to London and became a researcher on TV. And then whilst I was being a researcher, in England, in Southall, in fact, the whole Bhangra music scene was exploding, because it started in Southall, not Birmingham.
He said that to me because I'm from the Midlands, so that's a kind of rivalry, territorial.
Well, because Birmingham always says it started there, and I'm always absolutely adamant it started in Southall. Anyway, so that whole music was happening, and suddenly it was a brilliant thing for us, because it was both British and it was Asian, and it was something we were creating for, so it's by us, for us, but open to everyone else. And with the music came fashion, and I started wearing, Salwar kameezes with Dr. Martens and Union Jack socks and things, and like and a big leather jacket, and just started fusing, really. And then I had a very good friend, Kate Webb, who I said, I want to do a pop promo. I'd like to do a pop promo of one of these Bhangra bands. And she said, well, why do a pop promo? Why don't you actually make a film? I said, I can't make a film. I've never been to film school. And she said, do you think they know what they're doing? And really, it was my friend Kate Webb who helped me write an application to the British Film Institute to apply for, to apply for funding for a scheme that they had called New Directors, and I applied to make this film called I'm British But, and
which is on the BFI Player website for free. If there's any Gurinder completers in tonight, you can go on the BFI Player and it's up there. And it's a film that sets up a lot of the themes of your work.
Yeah, because it's about Britishness, about identity, but what it did was it sort of showed that I was always, kind of thinking outside the box, and I was always trying to resist the boxes that people were putting me into. And so I start by asking these 4 young Asians to describe themselves, but the 4 that I chose was from Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales and England. And so you're seeing these Indian faces, or these Asian faces, but then suddenly they're all like, not Irish, and you're like, oh? And the Welsh guy, and then the Scottish girl, Jabeen, she was like, I'd prefer to be called a Scottish Pakistani rather than British. And so that was mind-blowing at the time, because no one thought about us as regional. And that's when I started developing my voice, I guess. And it was Karen Bamborough, who was at Film 4 at the time. She saw that film and she said, that's a voice I need to nurture. and she then picked me up, and that was where I started making drama shorts, and then made Bargee on the Beach.
Bargee on the Beach, the first film. Do you remember where you were when you got the call from Channel 4 to say, the money's in place, you're going to be a director? Or was it just a series of memos that came your way? They're not quite so romantic.
Well, I knew it was a struggle.
Right.
You know, it was a struggle because we've been developing the blooming script for years, and it was this struggle to say, you know, can we do it? Can we do it? And there was always obstacles in the way. And I think what happened in the end was, by then David Orkin had come on board and hadn't actually commissioned that many films. And I think there was a situation where he was going to lose his budget unless he spent money. And so I think that's why we got the green light.
And it was a big, you know, there will be people in the audience who don't necessarily remember the early 90s for various reasons, but they may be too young. Being commissioned to do stuff for Channel 4, Film 4 in the early 90s, when there were only 4 terrestrial TV channels,
yes.
And you were guaranteed a primetime slot on Channel 4 in the slot that, say, Gogglebox or something would be on, so you knew that you would have an audience for that film.
Absolutely, and I thought that was the first and last film I was ever going to make. And so I thought, oh my God, somehow I've got through. And I didn't think it was ever going to last. And I just put, you know, everything into that film along with Mira. You know, Mira and I did it together, Mira Sial. And into that, you know, we put Black and Asian relationships, domestic violence, I mean, all kinds of issues. Cause
everything but the kitchen sink.
We were like, we're never going to be able to make another film. But what I did do when I got the green light for that film was I went out and bought my mum and dad a bungalow with my fee, because they, you know, worked in shops their whole life, and I got paid £32,000. I remember that for that film, and I put a deposit on a bungalow.
Yes.
Because that's what we do.
Yeah. I have a mad theory about that film. I'll give you a minute to brace yourself before. My theory is that going back and looking at that film now, it's almost like your Avengers Assemble. You know, it sets up the universe of Gurinder Chadha. In that, if you look at all your films since, a lot of the themes can be traced back to that film. And as you said, you're throwing everything in there. And it's almost like all of those themes have come out in different films in different ways. Is that so mad? Should I be locked up?
No, not at all. I think that that's true of most directors. You know, you make the same film over and over and over again. It just feels different, but actually it's the same themes, the same issues that motivate you. You know, I mean, I like to make films about different generations. You know, I like to make films that are very culturally specific.
Well, that was what's surprising when it came out, is that it was a young, unknown director making a film that was not only about the experiences of children and teenagers, but, you know, characters in middle age and in later life, Zora Segal's character. There was a lot going on in that film. Yeah,
there was a lot going on in terms of the Asian community, but what I also wanted to make sure was that it felt commercial. I remember that. I wanted to make sure that it was the people who were in the film, the characters in the film, people like them could enjoy the film. I didn't want to make an academic film that would be studied about the Asian community. I wanted to make a film that people could come to cinema and watch. So I definitely wanted it to be commercial. And I also, because it was Blackpool, I wanted to make it saucy, like a sort of postcard, yeah. Exactly, and make it culturally specific about Britishness and British seaside towns, as well as the Asian community. And hence we had sort of strippers in it, and there's a scene where the boys, you know, and when the women are on the coach going up to Blackpool, there's a scene of these football hooligans who abused the women at the service station before. And then on the bus, when they overtake them, they sort of drop their pants and moon them.
You can get away with that on Channel 4.
Yeah.
You couldn't get on the BBC.
No, but I do remember when the film was finally finished, and we had a screening, and my mum and dad came to see the film. And at that point, you know, my mum and dad was sitting there with all these strippers and all the rest of it, and these mooners. And afterwards, I said to my dad, "What do you think? Do you think it's a bit risque?" And he went, no. He said, "I think it's good to show English culture like it is."
They got a bungalow out of it. You know, they should be happy. I mean, I was a teenager when Bargee and the Beach came out, but it did strike me that something very definite was going on within British culture, and there were so many British Asian influences coming into the mainstream of British culture. So it wasn't just Bargee on the Beach. You mentioned Mira Sale. Goodness gracious me, he was on TV every week, and you know, everyone was watching that. Apache Indian in the charts. There was something going on at that moment, wasn't there?
Yes.
What was it like to be in the middle of all that?
Oh, it was so exciting. It was so exciting, and it defined me, you know, and it gave me a sense of confidence, gave me a sense of place, sense of belonging. What we were then seeing was the music that was being created in Britain was now going back to India and changing Indian music. You know, it was a really great success story for the diaspora, you know. And what I was trying to do was create stories for the diaspora, you know, and I was trying to make people understand that there is a cultural paradigm now, you know, that is us as sons and daughters of Indian immigrants who are fused, you know.
Do you want to take I'm worried about your voice. You've been talking on radio every 5 minutes all week. I don't want you to irritate you.
No, I'm fine. And I used to get into a lot of trouble actually in India, because in India journalists would say to me, why do you keep trying to cause trouble by talking about racism in your films? And I said, I'm not causing trouble. This is how we see the world. And they're like, oh, but you're in England now. You should just be British. And I'd say, no, but this is our version of Indianness. And just because you're in India, it doesn't mean you get to control what is Indian. And they always found that very hard to deal with. Still do, I think.
I'm sure. Despite that, I mean, I remember the film got very fond reviews. It got great word of mouth. People were going to see it. And yet, there's then a 7-year gap until you make your next film. Did you have projects I know you did some TV and you did some more short movies. Did you have projects lined up that you were trying to get funded but the funding didn't come through? Were you sitting at home watching Supermarket Sweep? Were you bashing your head against the wall? What was going on through that period?
Well, it was very hard because you are set up as a new voice. You know, we had a BAFTA nomination and, you know, we were sort of, it's like when they say, oh, here's the new voice, here's the new talent, and it still happens, you know. And then once you do one thing, then it's dropped. And I think that I was trying to make a film at that time called Funny Boy, which was by a Sri Lankan author. It was a book by a Sri Lankan author, and it was set in Sri Lanka, and it was about this boy who was set in the 80s against the backdrop of the Tamil and Sinhalese riots. And the story was about this little boy who loved to play with his sister and his friends, and they used to play bride, but he always wanted to play the bride. And his father would go around saying, I hope you're not going to turn into one of these funny boys. And of course he did. But in the end, it's very harrowing in terms of how the story unfolds, and you get to understand how someone becomes a refugee. And I thought that was very interesting because the family arrived in Canada with nothing, and he's Canadian now. And I thought I'd like to make a film about showing you how you become a refugee through this young guy's POV. But it was at the same time that Trainspotting had come out. And so there was this sort of visceral sort of sense of what British films should be. And I was trying to do this story because it was interesting to me. And so there was a disconnect. So I couldn't really get this film off the ground. And then during Bargee on the Beach time, you know, I had gone to lots of festivals, and one of them had been in San Francisco, and the director of the festival, Paul Burgess, ended up being my husband, and that's where we met in San Francisco.
Bargee on the Beach brought you together.
Yes, absolutely.
Lovely story.
And then I went to America for a bit, and I did get offered quite a lot of projects there. But, you know, so I was offered films in America, but I didn't really understand Hollywood.
Right.
So I thought, well, if they want me to make a film in America, why don't I make my own film? And Paul was also a writer, and so we sat down together and wrote What's Cooking.
Yeah. You've written with most of your films since with Paul. I wanted to know about the day-to-day writing arrangements. Is it does he sit at the laptop and you pace back and forth? Is it vice versa? Or are you both shouting ideas at one another? How does it work?
Well, I write all the good lines.
Okay. That's taking a different.
That's actually good.
Paul is here somewhere to defend himself.
Actually, it's the opposite. A lot of the great lines that people remember, for example, in Bend It Like Beckham, he wrote there's a reason why Sporty Spice is the only one without a fella. That was Paul. And I remember when he wrote the scene when Joe, the coach, comes to the house and says, the parents, you've got to let her play. You know, she's brilliant. And the parents are like, no way. And then Jasminda says, but Dad, Mum, look at Nasser Hussain. He's captain of the English cricket team and he's Asian. And the mother goes, Hussein? That's a Muslim name. Their families are different. So Paul wrote that, and I absolutely remember literally laughing and falling on the ground and laughing so much. But by then he'd had sort of several years of being part of an extended Punjabi family, so he knew the politics. So the way it generally works is one of us, so depends if the project comes to us by someone else or if we pick up a book. If I'm going to direct it, I always have to be able to see it. If I can't see it, then I can't work on it. But if I can see it and see the vision of it and what I would end up, how I would tell that story, then I write the initial treatment with Paul and explain how I see it. And then Paul often does the first pass. And then once he's done that, then I come in and I do a pass. And we used to sit at the computer together. We don't do that anymore because it causes too many rows. So we now do this thing going back and forth, you know. But what is great is that, you know, it's almost like we do 2 drafts at a time. So he's very, very diligent, and I'm very, very impatient. And I want it finished immediately, and Paul takes his time. And that's how it works between us, and that's really been the trick. But I think the biggest reason it works between us is because Paul has also directed, and Paul's first film that he made is called Enyo Identity, which we must put on our website, Paul, we must do that. But Paul's first film is about being Japanese American, and so it's very similar to I'm British But. You know, it's the same kind of thing. And in that film, he interviews his grandma, you know, talks about his grandma and encourages her to speak out as a Japanese woman. And so the similarities between the 2 films is amazing, given that he was on the other side of the world.
Well, I think you're still together, and you've got 2 lovely children who are stars in the making.
Yes, they're looking very bored right now.
I only asked that question because I know so many married couples who just won't be able to sit in the same room all day. But then, you know, I know many unhappy people, so that's how it works. You work in the media long enough. This is what happens, jadedness. That's it. You mentioned Bend It Like Beckham. I am assuming that most of the people in this room have seen Bend It Like Beckham, love Bend It Like Beckham. It is a universally loved movie. Were you a big football fan before you set out to make that film?
No, the way that film came together again is very interesting. I have a friend called Avi, who's a very nice Sardaji from Hounslow. And his parents know my parents, and he's best friends with my cousin Bino Amapap. And at Bino's wedding, I was hanging out with Avi because he's really into jazz. So I used to go to jazz concerts with him and a whole group of us. And my dad saw us together, and he was like, there's a potential match, you know. And he said, you know, who's that boy? I said, that's Avi. And he said, do you want to get married to him? What do you think? You know? And I was like, Dad, stop it. That's Avi. And he goes, yes, but anyway, Avi and I had a good laugh about it. Avi is married, very happily married to a wonderful Spanish lady, and we're still friends, and I still see him. And he actually, my kids don't know about this.
Surprise!
So Arby has a sister called Daisy, Gurjeet, and Daisy had always wanted to write. And so Arby said to me, look, my sister really wants to write movies, what do you think? And so Daisy, he introduced me to Daisy, and I said, well, yeah, let's write, show me, what are you burning to do? What are you burning to say? And that's what I say to everybody who says, I've got a story, I've got a good idea for a film, because I get that a lot. My next thing is then sit down and write it. Tell me why it's important to you, because anyone can have an idea, but it's very hard to bring that to fruition. And so with Daisy, she was the Man U supporter, big Ryan Giggs fan, because her husband was from Wales.
Yeah.
And she loved football, and then she wrote this story about an Indian woman from Hounslow who goes to Ireland to play football with a women's team in Ireland, has a terrible time, gets into a lesbian relationship.
There's a lot going on in this story.
I was like, cool cheap, man. She's from Hounslow. So I was like, and then sadly what happens is her dad has a heart attack, and so she has to come home, and she never gets to play football again. So I was like, a bit of a downer, Gurjeet, but never mind, just write something else, So, and she didn't have a computer either, she would handwrite this.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was back then, she would handwrite it.
Late 90s.
Yes, and so then I left it, I made, that's right, I made What's Cooking and carried on, and then we had Euro 96. And we saw, for the first time I saw in my life, Ian Wright running around the England football pitch with a Union Jack on his shoulders. And that had always been the domain of the National Front, the far right. The Union Jack did not belong to us, although I did wear the Union Jack socks, like skinheads, to sort of claim it. But the way that Ian Wright sort of claimed it. And then also going to pubs and stuff, I was watching people starting Sport England of all different ethnicities, and that was a big thing as well, because until that point, I mean, football is well cool now, but back then it was, there was a lot of hooliganism, there was a lot of racism, and it was not the place you wanted to go, if you were of colour. And then something changed. There was all these I remember going to a pub and England was playing, and there was people from every single background going, England, England, England. And that's when I realised, wow, the country's changing. I want to make a film about football, but I want to put an Indian girl in the lead. So I called Gurjeet and I said, right, come on Gurjeet, we're gonna make a film about an Indian girl, but we're not doing that story, we're gonna do this story. And then I pitched her my story, which became Bend It Like Beckham. Girl, Hounslow, has a sister who's getting married, can't understand why she's a tomboy, and then the story with the dad, which a little bit was based on my own dad, with the cricket, not being allowed into the cricket club because of the turban, and then Gurjeet would come to my house, and I'd make her sit with me at the computer, and she was like, I can't see any longer, Gurinder, I'm going to go and lie down. But it was only like, it was from 10 till 4 or something. But it was hard work. But I made her do it with me. And anytime there was a football reference where the girls talked about football, I said, right, you write that down. And I would just write jargon, football jargon. And then I said, no, you write it, the football stuff. So I did it because I wanted to mentor her and encourage her. But at the same time, she was the football fan. And I knew that I wanted to make something about a different kind of England.
And also, it's not just football, it's women's football. We're sitting here today,
yes.
Tomorrow afternoon, the England Lionesses play Cameroon on, I think BBC One in the afternoon. They're showing it, which 17 years ago would have been unthinkable.
Absolutely, yes.
And I suspect if you go through the England World Cup squad, they're all of an age where they may well have seen Bend It Like Beckham at a particular moment in their, a sort of formative moment in their lives. Yes. I suspect you have more to do with this England World Cup squad than anyone. Well, with the possible exception of Phil Neville. But I suspect if you went round their dressing room, they would all have seen it at a particular moment in their life.
Well, I'm happy because a lot of them say that. It's not just here, it's around the world. The whole Women's World Cup teams, they've seen the movie, and I did a big interview for a French magazine at the launch of the Women's World Cup.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on with my throat.
No, you have a sip of something. I insist. I'll waffle on for
I think it's dusty in here.
It is a little bit. It's a little
some
bit.
kind of dusting.
Well, I'm just thinking now, if we win the World Cup, then I think you should be on the front of the open-top bus going through the streets.
Yes!
Yes!
Throwing out DVDs.
Yes, use it as an opportunity. Got your business head on tonight. You must have been elated at the response to that film, the fact that it is so beloved. I mean, I get people coming up to me all the time telling me films they love and hate. Nobody hates that film. I know people who like it, but I know many more people who just passionately love that film.
Well, there's, it's an interesting thing because, you're right. Now, yes, it has become a beloved film. I remember when the film came out, the New York Times reviewed it, and it was shocking. And the New York Times review said, well, this film is terrible, and it's not the authentic voice of Asians in Britain today. And I was like, what? What do you mean?
It's good that they had to file that from New York to tell you.
Yes, it was a bloke, A.O. Scott. I don't know how Grudge is, but it was A.O. Scott. And I talk about it a lot, actually, which I'm sure must piss him right off. Because I said, well, I don't understand. Why would he think that a film that's written by an Asian woman, produced by an Asian woman, and directed by an Asian woman, set in the world where she grew up, would not be the authentic voice, as far as he's concerned?
Critics are funny people.
But you have to unpick that, talk about privilege, talk about closing you down. So that, I was up against things like that all the time. And what he did say was, he said that Hanif's film, My Son the Fanatic, he said that's the authentic voice of Britain, not Bend It Like Beckham. And what that meant was, for a lot of people, what they wanted to see was Asians in conflict, Asians suffering with who they are, suffering with coming to terms with their identities, having a culture clash between parents and kids, and like everything in the problematic, because that's how non-Asians told our stories, basically. And so this film came along. I mean, even East is East to some degree was like that. I remember going to see East is East in Camden in the Odeon, and I was enjoying it until halfway through, when the arranged marriage thing happened. These girls in front of me went, "Oh, that's disgusting. I hate it when Pakis do that," And I was like, "Oh no!" It took me out of the movie, and it just sort of confirmed all these stereotypes. But with Bend It Like Beckham, it was important to me, like I said, that the people who were in the film, the characters of them, were able to enjoy the film. And so obviously that's my community as well as other people. But I think the power to control who we are and make a film on those levels where you are talking to your own community, from West London or whatever, and a global community, that's I'm lucky that I have the opportunity to do that, and that is my USP. That's what I do, and very few other people do it and know how to do it in a commercial way. And I think the more people like A.O. Scott sort of tried to control me, the more I was like, you don't get it, And now to this day, Bend It Like Beckham has the record of, it's the only film made in the West, the only film actually, probably in the world, that has been distributed in every single country in the world, including North Korea. And no other film has that record.
Did you bust into North Korea and hand out copies? Is this how it's circulating? The one mystery with that film, and I had another look at it a couple of weeks ago, the thing that I am always left baffled by is you have Parminder Nagra, you have Keira Knightley. Keira then goes off and does the Pirates of the Caribbean movie the following year, becomes this massive international star. Parminder does ER for a little bit, she does a bit of TV over here. They're both equally good in the film, they're both equally photogenic. Why is it that one becomes a massive star, the other one, is it structural? Were there not the opportunities for an Asian actress back at the start of, or is it, Parminder had no interest in having that kind of career?
Oh no, I just think the paths weren't there for her. And, as soon as you cast a person of colour in a lead in a movie, the industry generally will tell you that it's not commercial, it's not going to make money, and it's too constricted in terms of the audience. So anyone who's able to cast a person of colour as a lead in a movie is taking a big risk as far as our industry is concerned. And I think the sadness for me with Parminder was that she just didn't get those opportunities. I think there's more opportunities now. I know I met Naomi Scott from Aladdin. And I only met her because she'd done interviews where she said the only reason she got into the business was because of Bend It Like Beckham, and she loved that movie, and that's why she became an actress. And so that, that's good, so she's now flying very high as an Asian woman. And so I think sadly for Parminder at that time, there just weren't those opportunities. However, Archie Punjabi is also in that film.
Yes.
And so Archie...
The Good Wife.
Yeah.
She's now a big star for that.
Yes, yeah.
Talking about butting your head up against the industry, you go from Bend It Like Beckham to Pride and Prejudice, your riff on Jane Austen. Did you ever sit in a meeting where someone said, you can't do this? You can't do Jane Austen with a Bollywood twist?
No.
Oh, wow.
Okay. No, everyone was like, oh, that's smart. And the Jane Austen Society of North America, and Britain actually, presented me with a lifetime membership of the Jane Austen Society.
You get a newsletter every month, and a t-shirt and some badges.
I love Jane Austen though, so...
Well, who doesn't?
In fact, I pitched an idea the other day on Twitter. There's a woman in Pakistan who has written a book called Austen Nation, I think, and it's about high-class Pakistani society, but told like a Jane Austen novel. And so she's authored that book, and I had some time finally after ages, and I just went through some tweets and stuff, and I noticed that she'd been having quite a hard time by publicly, on Twitter, talking about her divorce in Pakistan. And she, and I think what happened was her husband took a second wife, and she wasn't going to put up with it. And so she took him to court and had a very public divorce. And so got a lot of trolling for it, but then also a lot of people supporting her. And I was quite moved by this, and someone had sent her a tweet saying, this is what strong women should be, and she wrote, I read this tweet where she retweeted that and said, I hope someday I can do this. And I just retweeted her and said, you did, you are, you sound awesome. Tell the story, storytelling is the best tonic. And I sent that to her, and then she was like, oh my God, you tweeted all that. And I said, DM me. And then I said, I've got an idea. And so my idea for her was to say, why don't you tell your story that you've just been through in terms of your divorce and everything, but tell it like a Jane Austen period drama in Pakistan. So have everybody dressed like Jane Austen characters, but Pakistani, and just talking in the way that they would, because what you've been through sounds very much like how people see women and women's roles at that time. Sorry, I didn't thought that because that just happened. But I think Austin, I think all great literature talks to us, and I think that that's the great thing about art, is that it's for everybody, and that's because art deals with emotions, and we all have the same emotions, and we all laugh and cry about the same things. We just have to find our own narrative and our own story in it.
Yeah, and it crosses boundaries so that you can have a conversation with someone on the other side of the world. And
yes, and the thing for me though is it's important that we see ourselves, in the work. Otherwise, we don't exist. That's how I used to think, and that's what I do think, and that's why I make films about us.
Pride and Prejudice, obviously big Bollywood influence, which you talk about. We're at the London Indian Film Festival.
Yes.
Is Bollywood a big part of your life?
Not as big as some people probably in this room.
I was going to ask, do you still go to Bollywood films? Did you see Salman in Bharat the other week?
No.
No, okay.
My dad loved Bollywood films. My dad loved them, so so I have a nostalgic view of all the old films that he loved. We're going to talk about my new film in a minute, but I've got 2 songs from Biju Bavra in that film, along with Bruce Springsteen, and those were really for him. I was very grateful that Bollywood had its resurgence, and Bollywood came back. And I think there was 2 films that were responsible for that in this country, and one was Hum Aapke Hain Kaun, and the other was Dilwale Dulhania. And those 2 films radically changed Bollywood in Britain again. When I was young in Southall, there were 3 cinemas that showed Bollywood films. So I used to go a lot as a child, but that was mainly so I could get out of the house and have samosas and Coke in the interval, rather than the films. But now I think it's an incredibly important part of the Asian community in Britain, because a lot of those cinemas where those films are played are open still because of the Asian community, and because everyone buys shitloads of popcorn and stuff like that, to keep all the cineplexes going. So I think, and also culturally, they're changing. They are influenced more by the West, and in terms of production values. And since Netflix and all this has arrived in India, there are aims to try and tell stories that that work. Whereas when I was younger, it was always like, oh, it's an Indian film, you have to sort of park your certain sensibilities at the door and watch it like that.
Oh, I think
that's my husband saying, I think you should show some clips in.
Oh yeah, well yes, we'll crack on, and we'll get to the new stuff in due course.
Paul, can you butt out, please? Because he's in charge.
Well, they say I'm in charge. So running alongside the established history of cinema, I think most film lovers will know there's a sort of parallel history of films that almost got made but never quite. Am I right in thinking that immediately after Pride and Prejudice, your next big project was going to be the movie version of the TV show Dallas?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
The one thing I want to say about Pride and Prejudice, though, is that again, the record there is that it's the only film that's ever been #1 in England and India at the same time, which I thought was a big result for the diaspora. So that's good. But yes, after that, it was really after Beckham I started getting more Hollywood offers. But I said, no, I want to do Bride and Prejudice. And one of the films I got offered was Dallas. And that was great. It was John Travolta was playing JR, and Shirley MacLaine was Miss Ellie.
Jennifer Lopez?
We tried to get her, to be Sue Ellen. But what happened was, and the script was great. It was written by Bobby Harling, and I mean, obviously Dallas was part of my life, but it was all set during the Bush era, and JR was really Bush. And all his mates, Rumsfeld and Cheney, they were all, JR's mates. And it started with JR orchestrating a coup for oil in a Latin American country and then flying home for dinner. And when he got home, Miss Ellie was very upset because she'd gone to see all the Enron wives, whose husbands were now in jail. And they were all having to wear paste jewellery and had to sell all their jewellery. So it was very political. But interestingly, what happened was, and this happens in Hollywood, you know, often films don't get made for the most spurious reasons, but what ended up happening was that there was another actor that actually wanted to play JR, and John Travolta was from William Morris. And
Rival agency.
And this other actor was from CAA, and he was a big, powerful actor at the time, and because Fox didn't give him the job, he told CAA to not cooperate with the project, and so we couldn't cast the women.
Scolded over it. This is what, you know, meddling behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's what happened. And so,
that's Hollywood.
And so obviously Fox then didn't want to make the film because they didn't want to upset CAA at that time.
Gosh. But instead you ended up making Angus Thongs and Perfect Snogging.
Yes.
Which, when I took on this gig, when they told me that I was coming to interview you, I had to promise that I wouldn't just do 90 minutes on Angus Thongs and Perfect Snogging alone. Which, I mean, I saw it at the press screening because I was reviewing it for the Sunday Telegraph the week that it came out, and I remember coming out and sort of feeling like I was floating on air. Because I finally, someone's made a really terrific British teen movie that sort of measures up to the American teen movies that we watched growing up, sort of Pretty in Pink and 16
John Hughes,
Was that what you were aiming for, to make a sort of British version of those kind of American?
Yeah, I was making, you know, it was a big studio, it was Paramount, you know, so I wanted to make a studio film, but just, again, culturally specific. It was, you know, set in Eastbourne, and English, you know, and so I wanted it to feel very English and very Eastbourne and seaside towny. But of course, the more specific you go culturally, the more universal you are.
Yeah.
And I think it became, you know, a very popular film with young women because it talked about the girl being a bit gawky and not quite in control of herself, and then falling for a guy who was just too cool that she was never going to get. But at the same time, her parents were getting divorced, she thought. And so it was asking all kinds of questions about love. And so I just think it just, without putting out, you know, without feeling art house and hitting you over the head with a hammer, it just allowed young people at that time to see themselves, actually, and the complexity of their teenage lives.
So they're affecting this kind of sophistication, they're dropping French words into the conversation, but actually they're emotionally quite naive.
Yes, yeah, they're kids.
Yeah.
But they think they're not kids.
Yes. Yeah. It's a tricky time, adolescence.
Yes.
We all found that out.
But I did discover Aaron Taylor-Johnson, which I'm...
You did, and I was going to ask you about casting, because this is something that comes up time and time again. We talked about Parminder and Kira, you know, great discoveries that have gone on to various careers. Here you've got Georgia Groom, who I think is now in EastEnders, I believe so. She turned up in it briefly. You've got Aaron Johnson, now Aaron Taylor-Johnson, before he went on to Kick-Ass. You've got Eleanor Tomlinson, who's now Poldark's Eleanor Tomlinson.
Yeah.
You've clearly got an eye for young actors who are coming up. Is there something specific that you're looking for when they enter the room? Is it to do with the role, or is it a more general kind of...
Oh, I look for the truth. I just say, do I believe them? And if I believe them, then you'll believe them. But if I see them acting, then I don't believe them. Weird, but
no, that makes sense.
I don't know. I just think it's instinct, really. I mean, I remember with casting that, I got into a big conflict with the head of casting at Paramount because they really wanted to cast Alex Pettifer, who's a very nice guy and a huge name at that time, and for a teenage movie, you know, he
would have done that Stormbreaker.
Yes,
the teenage
he'd done some stuff in America, and I think he was going out with someone famous or something, so there was all that going on. But when Aaron came in, I just fell in love with the way he did it. He was the real deal, and that's all I kept saying. I said, he's the real deal. He's the real deal. He's not acting. He is Robbie, and thousands of girls, millions of girls around the world are going to fall in love with him, and that's what you want in a teenage movie, and that's exactly what happened. And I'm so pleased for him because he sort of went on to do great roles, you know, and Kira as well.
Yeah.
I thought Kira was amazing in Colette.
Oh, it's terrific, isn't it?
Oh
Yeah,
my
if you haven't
God,
seen it,
that's-
it's on
yeah,
DVD. It's
amazing.
terrific. Yeah. It has one of my Angus Thongs and Perfect Song has one of my favourite lines in any movie. And you're talking about this working for teenage girls. It actually works for grumpy 30 and 40 something men as well. It is one of those films that if it's on TV, and it's usually on a Sunday tea time, I will put it on and go, I'll give this 10-15 minutes, and then end up watching the whole thing all over again. But it has the great line where Georgia, the heroine, says, I already feel fed up with boys and I haven't had anything to do with them yet. Is that you or Paul? You can both claim credit for that.
Me.
I'm going to rattle ahead because we need to get on to the new stuff because that's.
And we've got to ask questions.
Yeah, we'll have questions for the audience because I'm sure people will have questions, but they've been burning to ask it for years. Let's skip ahead to Viceroy's House because that feeds into the new stuff. So this is 2017. I remember when Viceroy's House came out, it was a couple of years after Belle, the Amarasanti film about the legacy of British slavery in the West Indies. And I remember thinking, well, something's happening here because we've got two films coming out from filmmakers from very different backgrounds who wouldn't previously have been on a shortlist to direct a big, prestige, widescreen costume drama such as these films are. Did you think that something had changed within the industry?
Yes, obviously, which is why I wanted to do it. But what happened with that film was, I'd always wanted to do something on partition. And I knew the anniversary, the 70th anniversary was coming up. And then I was at a dinner, it was a reception in Buckingham Palace, and Prince Charles, I was talking to Prince Charles, and I said, I want to do something on partition, and your uncle, Mountbatten, and he immediately said, well, there's this book you really must read, and he gave me the name of this book called Shadow of the Great Game, which I had not heard about at that point. I just had Freedom at Midnight. And so the next day I went to all these bookshops and finally found the book. And for me it was explosive because the book told us the real reason why the partition of India happened. And the story that we had always been told was basically Hindus and Muslims couldn't get along, and so the country had to be divided, much like it was in Ireland and in Cyprus. It's part of the empire's way, the dividing of nations. What Shadow of the Great Game tells you is that actually Churchill was very angry with Gandhi because Gandhi had actually won, and Gandhi had sort of laid the death knell really for the end of empire, and he was trying to find a way to ruin Gandhi's big dream of freedom. But at the same time, what was happening was we were seeing the beginning of the Cold War, and the Soviet Union was getting very powerful, and the Soviet Union had played a massive role in winning the Second World War, and Churchill and America realized that if they gave India up, they wouldn't be able to, they wouldn't have a place in the Middle East to have their bases. And they knew they wouldn't be able to cooperate with India, and so they created this country, Pakistan, in order to have military bases. Now, whether you believe that or not, I mean, that's the theory of the book. And no one knew about these bases, and it was only a few years later when an American pilot got shot at over Soviet airspace, and was taken and survived, and was shown on Russian TV, and everyone was like, how the hell did he get to Soviet airspace? And that's when people realized there were American bases in Pakistan. So that became the story that I wanted to tell, rather than a big story about, us, suffering, although my parents and my grandparents, of course, became refugees, and that was part of the story. But I wanted to do it in a way that changed the history, that shifted the history, and so that people would, it was unexpected. I wanted to do the take that was not expected.
Yeah. And I've seen it with audiences twice, and both times there's an audible gasp from the audience during the beginning of the closing credits, where this is not to give anything away, but there's a just as the film finishes, there is a picture that's put up on the screen of an Indian family who went through partition, and the picture fades from black and white into colour, and it's revealed that the woman at the bottom left-hand side of that picture is
my grandmother.
Yeah. And the audience, every time, both times I've seen it, sort of there's a sort of immediate personal connection there. Was partition something that you spoke about in your household, or was it something that you only sort of discovered when you were doing the research?
Oh no, it was completely part of our psyche. Every Punjabi person, I would say, because we're all connected somehow. Punjab was cut in half, and half went to Pakistan, half went to India, and so there's still, a lot of trauma about that. And my grandmother, so my family were from Jhelum and Rawalpindi, which is now Pakistan. And my grandmother came to live with us when we were young. And she, we would watch, I remember very clearly, we would watch telly, and we were watching Crossroads one day, and David Hunter came on. This is going to go over so many minutes.
One of the teenagers. So many tonight.
This actor, David, I can't remember what the actor's name was.
Yeah, he was kind of suave.
Very suave, very, yes.
Kind of Nigel, I was going to say Nigel Havers, like the teenagers would know Nigel Havers.
But it looks a bit like Cary Grant. No one will know that. Oh God, who was it? Who's seen it like
He's
today?
the modern day equivalent of Nigel Havers, quick.
Anyway, he was very good looking, very tanned. Obviously went to Italian place a lot. And suave and good looks. And every time he came on screen, my grandmother would freak out and say, he's a Pathan, he's a Muslim, and we go, no, Bidgie, he's English. And she'd go, no, you don't know what they did. They took girls from their beds, they raped them, they did this. And we'd be going, no, it's Crossroads Motel, it's Birmingham.
It's not real, you can see the walls wobbling.
But she was traumatised from it still, and so that, we laughed at it at the time, obviously. But
there was a trauma coming out.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
We're going to, the reason I bring up Viceroy's House is that on some level it feeds into Beecham House, which is the new series, which we've got a clip of that coming up. We've also got a trailer for Blinded by the Light.
Yes.
Or a trailer for Beecham House and a clip of Blinded, one or the other. You'll get clips of both as we hopefully will come up on the screen behind us. You can see what we're about to talk about.
So with Viceroy's House, it took a long time to get that film off the ground. Just because people were nervous about it, and because again, I was telling my history the way I wanted to, and while we were waiting for it to come up, to get financed, Paul and I decided all the research we'd done, let's turn it into a TV show, and that's when we started writing Beecham House, along with Shahrukh Hussain, who's a wonderful historian friend of mine, and so we came up with this idea of telling the story of the British in India, but through the goings-on of this house, Beecham House. But what happened was, just to get the clips in context, is we started developing it with ITV, which was amazing, because Polly Hill had said to me, and the first time in my career anyone's ever said this to me, was she said, I love this idea, and I want you to know that the Indian characters are just as important as the English characters, and make sure you tell their story too. So I was like, oh, thank God, finally I'm hearing that. Because of course I never heard that. I kept trying to stick us in everywhere. Anyway, Polly said that, but then it took a while for her to commission the series for whatever reason in terms of TV scheduling. And so last Christmas, I thought, this isn't going to happen. I need to set up a movie for last year. So I set up Blinded by the Light. So we were all set to shoot that in April, May of 2018. And then just before Christmas, Polly called me and said, we're commissioning the show. So I was like, oh, great. Because I was supposed to be making a movie, and then last year I ended up making the movie and 6 hours of Beecham House, which is why the two now sort of are coming out together.
Well, put your feet up, because you've had a busy time. We're going to watch a clip of both Beecham House and Blinded by the Light. Fingers crossed.
Welcome to Delhi, Sahib. It is an honor to meet you. I am Badal.
Pleasure to meet you, Bud. आपका मिलकर मुझे बहुत खुशी हुई. मेरा नाम John Beecham है. This is Ramlal, trusty servant.
No one mentioned a baby is coming, Sahib.
Badal, you will learn that I'm a private man. Now, I should like to see the house.
Of course, sir.
In a garden full of beautiful flowers, I see your eyes have rested on the only English rose.
I was surprised, that's all.
It is a rarity in Delhi. Come, I should like to introduce you.
The Cold War rages on. Reagan and Thatcher are still #1. But I'm stuck in Luton. No fun, freedom, or future.
Javid writes all the time. He's ever had a girlfriend before.
Is it against religion?
September 3rd, 1987. You got Wham Boys, Banana Rama Girls, and then there's me.
Who here wants to be a writer? The writers I admire make a difference.
Listen, if you want to succeed, do what the Jews do. Let's get racist, Dad. Stay away from the girls! Follow the Jews! Come on, everyone! My family is stuck in another century.
You do not know this country like I do. They will never accept you, beta.
It's good to not fit in.
This is our table now.
Bruce, the direct line to all that's true in this shitty world. Seriously.
Thank me later.
I didn't know music could be like that. It's like Bruce knows everything I've ever felt. Everything I've ever wanted.
That's what you call real music.
Springsteen. He's more what your dad listens to. Not my dad.
Eliza's very picky on who she brings home. The more provocative, the better. What's provocative about Javed?
I want to be a writer.
Writing isn't a job.
I need you to do more. I can't wait to get away from here. Shazia, you look like a Pakistani Madonna.
When I'm dancing, I block out the world.
I know what you mean.
If you don't fix this now, we will lose our son for good.
You cannot be serious.
Bruce sings about not letting the hardness of the world stop you from letting the best of you slip away. I hope to build a bridge to my ambitions, but not a wall between my family and me. The music, the possibilities, I want to taste it all for myself.
You still coming to a party tonight? Emma's mates are coming, and I know one who would be perfect for you.
Really?
It's not fussy.
So, we're sitting here now, it's Saturday night, it's 8:15. We're 24 hours away from Beecham House starting on ITV in what's the Downton Abbey slot. Are you nervous? Are you excited? Do you just want to get it out there? What's the feeling?
Well, I think there's a lot of anticipation now. So I'm a little nervous about the fact that there is so much
Pick of the
anticipation.
day.
Yeah, times 50 in so many papers. But I think the only thing that I'm nervous about is that for some people it might not be political enough, and for others it might not be steamy enough, and for others it might not be enough about the Indians, and for others it might be too much about the Indians, and la 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 la. So I think that keeping all the audience elements happy, I think it will probably, I don't know, you got to just do what feels right for you, and I've done what I think is right for a Sunday night TV slot. I love Sunday night drama. It's my favourite thing to watch, you know, and I don't want to be too taxed, but I do want to be informed, and I do want to have a bit of romance, and I want to have a bit of politics, and I want to be transported. That's what I want from a Sunday night drama, and so that's what I've done.
How easy is it to switch between film and TV? Is it the simple fact that you get more time with TV?
Yeah, I mean, that was great, was having 6 hours to tell our story as opposed to 90 minutes. I mean, that was a great thing for us. So we were able to sort of take storylines and characters through 6 hours and really develop stories and really develop themes. And also, for the first time in our lives, we had to write to commercial breaks. And initially I was like, God, how are we going to do, like every 10 minutes we've got to have a cliffhanger. But actually, commercial breaks are your friend in drama, because you're able to push a story to a point and then you can go to a completely different part of the story instead of having to, you know, cut to something related.